Having given the first piece a flatten, before we mark stitch the two pieces, obviously they need to be aligned perfectly on top of each other. When mark stitching, we only need to take down the details, and only as much as it'd be helpful. Hence, on the balance points, you might like to just take a stitch at least 1 centimeter from the seam. This way, they aren't caught when we machine them. Down the center front and most other straight lines could be very wide. From a human psychology standpoint, I always start from the most work and go backwards. I start marking the outside leg on the back trouser and end with the crease on the center front. More logistically, and trust me when I say that what can be most helpful, the waistband is an important seam. On the front, we want to mark about 1 centimeter from the front edge, and on the inlay on the center back, do a mark stitch halfway through there as well. At the seat seam, we'd want it more dense. Really, anywhere there's a curve, it should be more dense, and less so where it's just straight. I suggest a mark stitch on the side and inseams right where it begins to flare out, so that we know where we need to begin flaring at the hem when we machine them and put them together. For the darts, we could just cut notches on either side at the top and do a single mark at the bottom, with the top of the stitch at the exact point, at the exact bottom of the dart. If we do this every time, we will be able to stop thinking about it. It will be clear where the dart is. And if we mark stitch all the chalk in the dart, it tells us the exact same information, but it takes longer to mark stitch, and then we need to take them out again when we sew the dart closed. Like I said, snipping into the top of the waistband to show the path of the dart from the mark stitch. As I finish the first piece, I will always split the marks before marking the next one. Cutting the patterns into two is easy, and when you're cutting the threads loose, do be sure that you can see the hole of your scissors, otherwise you may have to start over. Be aware of where other uncut threads are, because you may pull those out without noticing while trying to cut some others. This is more difficult if you have more mark stitches, so that's just another reason to do less. If it does happen though, just pull out that whole bit of stitch thread and redo it. A couple of things that can make this easy for you is to use a thicker basting thread and to have a greater amount of thread between each stitch. By the time you've done it several times, it will become quite easy, even though it feels like hours the first few times. Honestly, mark stitches at this stage are quite tough. I literally have pairs of trousers that still have mark stitches in them because I haven't taken them out and they haven't fallen out. I am also mark stitching the pocket opening onto the blind so that I can apply it properly later. Like I said, it's a different method from the sample. We need to curve the folded edge of the crotch guard. Wet it, use a steamy iron and pull it, stretching the folded edge. Try to shrink the sleisha towards the pointed edge by pulling the point and steaming, pulling the point perpendicular away from the iron, rocking them back and forth, moving towards the point. Try and press out any creases. When the folded edge is stretched, you can focus on shrinking the two raw edges, drawing the iron from the center towards the raw edge. This takes quite a bit of practice, and it is easier if we do the two pieces separately and on a fabric ironing board, not on a varnished wooden worktop. Basically, we know it's properly curved when we check it on the trouser. We don't want it to be very slim or slender at the top or the bottom, where it goes off of the trouser. Take the two apart if not already and place them together with the raw or plain sides together. Take your front trouser and place the point onto that triangle. Be sure though that the top resides 2 centimeters below the crotch notch or 2 centimeters above it. I usually do above it. Cut it out following the edge of the fork. Make certain that you have 2 mirror images rather than 2 identical pieces. Like I said, if the folded edge runs very close to the raw edge of the trouser rather than curving away, then it isn't curved enough. You could elect against cutting it just yet and attach it first, trimming it to fit later. On the front trousers, we need to add 1 centimeter to the pocket opening line towards the side seam. We give the pocket line a 1 centimeter seam allowance and cut along that line. It is objectively better to put the lining on and then do this afterwards, but it doesn't particularly matter for a straight finish. If we were doing a fitting, then we would have to leave it for now. We're going to baste the lining and the crotch guard to the front trouser. Since the lining is cut larger than the trouser, start with one side, line one edge as flush as possible, and the top flush as we cut it. Start with basting on the top, starting at the flush side, the more flush side, creating fullness in the lining along the top by pulling a small amount of the lining towards the previous stitch. We can't have the lining be tight. Baste quite close to the edge of the trouser fabric, keeping your hand underneath. Go back to where we started and baste down the more flush edge. As we baste down, it is very important that we don't give the lining any ease. We need the lining to still be 5 inches below the knee as we cut it. I've seen other tailors on YouTube putting ease as they go down the leg, so when I say don't put ease in vertically, that's a trouser maker with much more than 15 years as a trouser maker behind her saying not to put ease in vertically. I know I said keep an open mind to methods, although some things have been tried and tested that I will confidently share and say is superior. For the second side, we need to give the lining a small hill's worth of extra cloth, still basting close to the edge of the trouser. There is a hairline sweet spot. We can't have too much, but too little is any less than a hair's less than too much. If we do have too little, short term it could shrink and we'd end up with a smaller trouser. Longer term, it could tear. It comes with experience and really much more easily if you have someone with experience to critique you in the moment. If it's the correct amount, we should be able to brush the lining with our hand to distribute the ease to the point that it feels as though it might disappear, as though if we could press the whole surface at once, the lining would lay flat. Too much extra and the lining will pleat too much and too easily. The lining I'm using is rather coarse, so I can move the cloth to the desired amount and just do that, but usually you'd have to push in the ease with each stitch. Since I have already cut the portion beyond the pocket opening, I will put in a separate baste that I will leave in because I'm not going to overlock the pocket opening, which to be honest is exhibit B of should have not cut it away yet. We can do a small check that the amount is correct. Like I said, we should be able to brush the lining with our hand to distribute the ease to the point that it feels as though it might disappear. Once we're happy with the amount of lining we've basted in, we will trim off the excess. Right side up, cut the lining flush with the front trouser. Then we can put on the crotch guard. Whether we trimmed it already, we line it up to the fork in the same way, basting along the edge like we did the lining. Baste it down and trim away the edges before we overlock. We usually overlock the edges of the fronts and backs to prevent them from fraying. I would say that you're unlikely to have an overlocker, hence you would be okay just to use a normal stitch to hold everything together on the front, machining just the fronts less than 0.5 centimeter from the edge. If you have pinking shears as well, I might suggest you trim the fabric all around the inlays to inhibit it from fraying. We would overlock with all the pieces right side up for every run of overlocking. We also wouldn't overlock across the bottom of the hem until we put the front and back together before we put up the hem. Before we put up the hem. I'm also skipping the portion of the front where the slanted pocket is. This is going to become a bulkier seam, so I am avoiding giving it any unnecessary thickness. If we didn't cut it away yet, we could just overlock the whole side seam and cut it away later. You can find greater detail in the slanted pocket sample video, but be aware that there are a few differences. Lay the facing and blinds downside down with the bags. Make mirror images between the 3 pairs of bits. Make sure you know which side is which for the blind and facing, i.e. the facing lines up flush to the edge of the pocketing with the notches on the slanted seam, while the blind or big facing sits 3 cm behind the other edge of the pocket. But we're not applying the big facing to the pocket bag yet. Iron 1 cm under for securing the small facing in place. We might prefer to chalk the 1 cm beforehand. To fill the facing in place, line up the notches of the facing and the pocket bag, lining it up to the correct edge. Doing both at the same time, making sure you always have mirror images. Just baste along the folded edges in order to fill them. Once they're basted on this time, I am marking 1 cm in from the raw, straight edge of the facing at the bottom. I am leaving this small section unfastened down this time. You can see that when I moor my thread that my first stitch is on that 1 cm point. You can fell the facing down or machine it down. I'm overlocking one edge of the blind, like we know this is replacing the side seam that we already cut off, so I'm going to overlock the edge beyond the pocket opening line. Just mark it on for clarity since I didn't want to take my tripod to work. We are overlocking the entire perimeter of the back. Take our shorter back piece of back pocket silesia and the 19 by 6 cm piece of linen we cut for it. On the linen, fold up one of the long edges, maybe 3 mm, and iron it all along that edge. Place the linen onto the silesia with the folded edge facing into the pocketing and the remainder of the raw edges lined up to the edges of the silesia. We will edge stitch the linen to the silesia along the folded edge. No need to back tack at all. Press the seam and keep it with the other piece of back pocket silesia. You can find more in-depth guidance in my zip sample video for this. Cut the linen for the back of the fly and fly guard. Just place them onto some linen and cut around them as closely as possible. Put the linen onto the wrong side of their appropriate pieces, machine them along the gentle curve with the one with the notch with a less than ½ cm seam allowance. Linen side up both times. Trim the linen exactly around the pieces if it's sticking out a little bit now. For the fly, attach the fly silicea we cut to the curved edge inside to inside, with a little extra at the top and the bottom to sew them together with a 1/2 centimeter seam allowance. Then we attach the fly guard to its lining inside to inside with a whole centimeter seam allowance. We press the fly guard inside out, except such that the trouser fabric is superimposed on the lining by a few millimeters. So maybe if we sewed it with a small centimeter seam allowance, that would have been better. Never mind. A convenient way of doing this, linen side up, is to fold the seam allowance over with the stitching on the edge or a bit onto the linen, ironing it as we go. When we turn it out, there will already be a crease exactly where we want it. Cement the crease from the front with another press. On the fly, iron the silicea tape over and then back over the fly. Then you need to sink stitch between the fly and its silicea on the front of the fly. We can prick stitch it to be more precise or machine it. Now, to be fair, we didn't necessarily need to leave the machine and iron the tape over. We could have stayed sat down for a second and just fingered the tape into the same position as we do it anyway, tightly over the fly, just rolling it over as we feed it through the machine. Firstly, we overlock around all the back trouser, except for the hem. It is very important that we overlock it before we sew the dart, because the dart will want to open and stretch at the top when it's folded downwards into the trouser later, and it won't be able to do that if the dart is overlocked closed. To prepare your waistband, you might like to overlock one of the straight edges of the cloth. Usually I use the selvage instead, but I will overlock one of the sides parallel to the grain. To be fair, I don't think it needs to be overlocked though, like at all, ever. This is an alternative method for making side adjusters that I think might be slightly superior. Fold them in half long ways, right side on the inside, and sew the ends with a 1/2 centimeter seam allowance. We might like to trim the fabric beyond the stitching on the folded edge so that it'll sit nicer when we fold it out. We are ironing the seam open. Flip it out and gently push it into a point, making the point symmetrical and ironing it down like that. With the seam we made on the outside, fold it in half again to machine the long edge with a 1/2 centimeter seam allowance. Do the same for both, and with the long tab we also need to fold the small side with the seam allowance in the middle of the tab, folding the seam allowance open and machining that little bit back and forth with a 1/2 centimeter seam allowance. Press the seam allowances open, flattening the tabs gently into arrows. We could brush them with a little bit of tailor's soap just before we turn them out to hold the tabs flatter later. We can use a knitting needle, or in my case a chopstick, to flip the tabs outside out, but whatever you can do to achieve the same effect. We can use the chopstick as well to massage rather than push or force the corners out, giving us good strong right angles in the long tabs. Final iron, manipulate the tabs into as symmetrical arrows as is efficient and give them a press in place. Once we're happy that all 4 pieces are quite similar, we can put them in our Ziploc bag with the buckles. Remove the basting, excess threads, stitching, whatever, and press the perimeter. I also want to snip into the crotch notch again so that I can see it through the overlocking. I can't do what I normally do to create the center front crease because domestic irons don't have a strong forceful jet of steam button. I'm just going to adapt. I'm starting with just pushing the excess lining towards the side seams away from the center front. Usually I'm using the strong forceful jet of steam to just press the excess down, and it looks very wrinkled that way, but it does sit quite flat. I'm folding the trouser in half gently along the crease, preserving where I put the lining. The crease usually starts a little above the bottom of the rise, so we can start there. Feel through the fabric and make sure the lining is clean and flat under there. Place the iron onto the fold and begin to create our crease. Ordinarily, I'd be pressing the entire width of the trouser, but the lining is dense at the edge and it would crease significantly, so I won't do that here. As I begin to move on to the next section of the fold to crease, again I'm feeling through and gently forcing and rubbing my hand through the fabric to the lining, making sure it's flat under there. As we get to below the lining, it's easy just to press it flat. There's nothing there to complicate it. Check that your crease is sharp enough to pass the paper test, and also check the lining side. We want a good single crease in the lining as well. If the lining is creased or pleated, then just iron those out. Here you can see where the overlocking is on the blind, so you can see just before we start making the pockets. I'm pressing over the 1 centimeter on the 2 edges to get them ready for making. To prepare the waistband, place the fabric wrong side up to place the banroll canvas onto the overlocked side, such that the bias tape on the edge is sitting on top of the heavy waistband canvas. I'm pinning them together so that I don't lose the correct sides when I go to the machine. I'm not bothering to chalk, I'm just going to hold them together so that the selvage is about 1 centimeter from the edge of the canvas. Or, not the selvage, in this case the overlocking. When you sew them together, sew about 5 millimeters from the edge of the waistband canvas. Don't bother back tucking at all. As we're machining, hold the waistband taut to the effect of not allowing the fabric to be pulled by the feet, which would create unwanted ease. In the same sense, I'm doing it section by section so that I can hold it down on the tiny amount of table that I have with my machine, keeping the waistband fabric under constant tension. Iron the seam. Iron the waistband taut over the canvas. To make it very clean, smooth and flat, lay it fabric side down first. Lay your hand onto the fabric and push the canvas into it. Use your iron as a weight to press it flat in the first corner and then do the same all along the waistband. Then we can baste and or overlock the bias tape, trimming away any excess fabric. You can see me using that method in the waistband sample video. We could also use tailor's soap on the canvas and then the bias tape, and then iron them using the weight of the iron to hold the waistband in place while we pull the fabric vertically straight down, sticking it to the waistband. For the seam, we could sew about halfway through the bias tape to hold it down. With this method, while the soap is still holding the fabric to the waistband, we'll give it a stitch down the middle of the bias tape. We want to check about halfway through that the fabric isn't being pulled, and if it is, or regardless, I usually do it anyway, if it is, hold the very ends tight together to make sure it doesn't pull any more. If the soap was done well enough, it should hold the cloth and canvas together thoroughly as we sew it. Check that the waistband is acceptable, that it hasn't pulled, that the cloth isn't dragging, that there aren't too big bubbles, and we'll move on. If you do have some pulling or bubbles, then you can try to press the extra cloth to shrink it down. If that doesn't work, then you'll have to try again. You can see that the entire perimeter of the back trouser except for the hem is overlocked. Never overlock the hem until the leg is put together and the hem is trimmed. If it is really fray, then maybe pinking shear the raw edge. To prepare the back trousers, first thing you need to do is extend the darts up into the inlay. I suggest it from this point on, largely only chalking on the wrong sides of the cloth. Chalk the dart onto the piece of fabric that's only been mark stitched so far as well. How I mark stitched, I know where the center bottom of the dart is, and I cut notches into the top so I can put those together, and I don't need a center line of the dart. We also know where the top is because we have the waistline mark stitched. Technically these are clems rather than darts. I'm pretty sure a dart is one that opens and closes, a clem is open-ended. We could taper the dart inwards on the inlay. This isn't totally necessary though. We can make a straight stitch top to bottom. Either way, don't back tack at the top of the cloth. It's very important that we always overlock before we sew the dart. We don't want the dart to get caught in it. When you fold the dart over, iron it flat and you can baste it if you want. Don't baste on the dart line just next to it. When you start machining it, pull an excess of thread and do hold it when you start sewing. Start sewing from the top whether you're sewing all straight or tapered. And when we get to the bottom of the dart, keep machining off of the fabric, that which will quickly and easily secure the thread. To attach the flies, step 1 is attaching the fly to the left trouser. Lay them right side to right side. Align their notches or pin or baste it in place. Or not, whatever. I'm just going to hold them together properly at the machine. But before going to the machine immediately, step 1A is attaching the zip to the front of the right trouser. Line up the zip top side down to the notch and or mark we made and baste it in place. When we place it down, we need to place the bottom stop of the zip a small amount above the notch. At least 2 millimeters and maybe 7 mil absolute maximum. Align the fly guard, lining up the notches right side to right side with the zip in between. Moving its lining or silicia out of the way, baste it or not, but know where the notches are and that they're aligned when you're machining them. Machine the fly and the left trouser together with a small centimeter seam allowance, so if you can make a consistent 7-8 mil seam, that is better. It will become a 1 centimeter seam allowance when we fold the fly over. Start right on the notch with the linen up, as we usually should be working with the linen on top. We can sew off of the top of the trouser. With the right trouser with the bearer, sew the 3 together as close to the zip teeth as possible. Snuggle the foot up to the zip teeth and follow them up the zip. It can't be seen, but I can't even fit my fingernail between the foot and the zip teeth or the bottom stop. Sew them together from the notch with the linings facing up. Chalking the notch on clearly would help to back tack onto it accurately. It's also important, if we didn't baste it, that the edges are lined up, this being an exception to the linen side up rule. We might need to move the zip out of the way if you have a small zip. I think 10 inches is a good size. If it's 8, that's too small for me. If you're practicing, then it's okay, but 10 inches is what I keep in my trousers. We can just sew out the top of the trouser again. Check that the bottom of the stitching is secure and that the machining is smooth and even, and that you kept your foot tight to the zip. Remove the basting, give the seam a press. On the fly side, cut at the notch to the stitching and trim away half of the fly seam all the way up. Iron the seam allowance towards the fly from above the notch. Fold the seam over such that the seam is on the inside of the trouser, which should be easy given the combination of how we cut it and ironed the seam allowance. Hold the fly so that the seam is about 1 millimeter from the fold and press it down. We are not going to baste it yet. For the zip, again, get rid of the basting and press the seam flat. Cut through the trouser, bearer and the zip tape to the start of the stitching at the notch. We'll open up the bearer so that the zip is flat, but we're pressing the bearer's seam allowance open and the front trouser under the zip tape. This way we have the overlocked seam and zip pointing in towards the trouser and the raw edge of the bearer pointing into the bearer, where it will be fastened away later.